The confirmation email arrives at 11:47 p.m. The piece you'd been watching for 3 weeks. The price high enough that most people who see it will never ask what it cost. You don't fully remember deciding. You remember the feeling at 10 p.m. though. Your partner had rolled over, glanced at your screen, and said nothing. Not a judgment, just a glance. That was enough. Your thumb moved before you did. You told yourself it was for you. You didn't quite believe it. 3 days later, it's on your doorstep. 15 seconds of something like relief. Then it joins the others in the closet, the ones you also don't remember choosing and never actually showed anyone. Psychologists have a word for this. Oniomania, from the Greek onios, for sale, and mania, madness. First described in psychiatric literature in the early 1900s, early clinicians described patients who could recite the price of everything they owned and the reaction of everyone who'd ever seen it. But the label misses the real mechanism. It was never about loving to shop. It's about needing the wanting to stop. For 15 seconds, buying it did exactly that. The name stuck because the mechanism never changed. Only who's watching did. Here's what's actually happening inside your skull. When you see the piece, not the box, not the moment it arrives, just the image on a screen, your brain releases dopamine. Everyone assumes that's the reward molecule. It isn't. It's the anticipation molecule. Neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz proved this with an experiment that's now foundational in behavioral neuroscience. He ran wires into the brains of monkeys and gave them juice. At first, dopamine fired the moment the juice hit their mouths. But once the monkeys learned that a light reliably predicted the juice 30 seconds later, the spike moved. It stopped firing at the juice and started firing at the light. The brain had already collected its reward, 30 seconds early, for nothing but a signal. Luxury retail didn't need to discover this. It just needed to industrialize it. A price tag high enough to filter who's even allowed to want it out loud. A salesperson who says, "Let me check if we have your size," like it's a favor, not a transaction. None of it requires a real crowd. A single glance from a stranger works. A single "nice" from someone whose opinion you don't even respect works. Every one of those is the light. The piece was always just the juice, and juice on its own was never going to match 6 seconds of pure almost. Stop here for a second, because this matters more than the mechanism itself. If you're recognizing this, the price you quietly checked while a friend was in the room, the piece you finally got and wore once, the way you angled the receipt so no one would see the total, it's familiar. You are not careless with money in the way you've told yourself you are. You are a nervous system doing exactly what it evolved to do, sitting inside a market engineered to make being seen wanting something feel like belonging. You are not broken. You are targeted. Those are two very different problems, and only one of them is your fault. Americans currently carry over $1 trillion in credit card debt. A meaningful share of it sits on purchases made in exactly this state. Not desperation, just the need for someone, anyone, to notice. Watch what actually happens with a purchase like this. Not when it arrives, when someone else sees it. "Is that new?" a coworker asks, and something in your chest lifts before you've even answered. "Oh, this old thing?" you say, already knowing you're lying, already loving that they asked. That reaction is the real payment. The box in the closet was only ever the receipt for it. Or it happens quieter than that. You post one photo, not a caption about the purchase, never that obvious, just the piece, in frame, almost by accident. Then you watch the number under it. Not for long, just long enough to know somebody clocked it. Researchers studying compulsive buying keep finding the same trigger, and it isn't stress, it's emptiness. A quiet, low-arousal nothing that needs filling. Not the wallet, the evening itself, and the fact that nobody in it seems to be paying attention to you. Buying doesn't fill it. Being noticed does. Buying is just the fastest way to get there, which is exactly why it never actually works for long. Notice what you remember and what you don't. You can describe exactly where you were standing when someone complimented it. Try to describe the piece itself, alone, in an empty room, with nobody there to see it. Harder, isn't it? Your brain filed the purchase under witnessed, not owned, because the reward was never the object. It was the audience. There's a specific kind of math people run after a purchase like this. Not what it cost, what it would have cost to want it in silence, with no one ever knowing. Almost nothing this expensive ever gets returned quietly, because returning it would mean admitting out loud that the 15 seconds were never really about the piece at all. You were never buying the piece. You were buying the moment someone else registered it. And when that moment passes, compliment given, reaction received, story told once at dinner, the flatness returns. So you go looking for the next reaction. It was never about the purchase. It was about the audience. It always was. So here's what you actually know now. The piece in your closet was never the point. The point was being seen wanting it. Your brain doing precisely what it evolved to do, inside a system that turns every glance into a small hit of proof that you exist. The clinical name for it is Oniomania. The real name is simpler. The moment you realized wanting felt better than having, and that having only really counted once somebody else clocked it. Nobody sat you down and explained the mechanism. They just built a market where every nice bag and every silent stare is doing the advertising for free. This isn't a case for buying less or more or differently. It's the difference between wanting something because it's yours and wanting something because of what it might make someone else think of you. One of those settles, eventually. The other one never does, because there's always one more person who hasn't seen it yet. Next time you feel that flatness at 10 p.m., the one that always seems to end the second nobody's around to see what you bought, you'll know exactly what it is. Not weakness, wiring. Knowing that won't make the wanting disappear, but it gives you something the wanting never could. A choice.